Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're here today with Brookes Moody, who formerly actually worked with Writers.com for a couple of years, so it's lovely to have her on camera again. Brookes Moody earned a PhD in English with a concentration in creative writing from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where she taught literary journal production and creative writing. She also holds an MFA in creative writing from the New School. A Jersey girl with Rhode Island roots, her poetry and creative nonfiction has appeared in magazines like Swamp Pink, formerly Crazyhorse, Mississippi Review, The Literary Review, Phoebe, and Crab Creek Review, among others. Brookes has worked in all facets of publishing, whether that's as an indie bookseller, on the editorial board of a literary journal, or in the publisher's office at Red Hen Press. You can find Brookes spending her vacation days at one writing retreat or another. We're about to hear from her forthcoming collection, Astral Weeks, etc. Brookes, take it away.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you to writers.com for having me back. This feels like coming home a little bit, as Sean said, having worked here for about 2 years. And I just want to give them a plug. If you're here and you're at all interested in any of their courses, they have wonderful faculty or free events like this. So sign up for their newsletter, visit writers.com. That's the easiest one to remember. And of course, again, I was saying this earlier, but thank you everyone for being here, whether you know me or not. I know that there's friends and family out there, so thank you for your support and hopefully new friends if I don't know you already. As Sean said, I'm going to be reading from my forthcoming book. It's coming out March 14th, but you can pre-order now, especially if you pre-order before January 17th. You get the sales price. So don't sleep on that. It's from Finishing Line Press, which is a press in Kentucky. They've been around about 30 years, and I'm really honored to be in their stable of writers. So check it out. You can, I think there'll be something in the chat along those lines or email afterwards. Um, what this book is really about is the relationship we have with art and one another through art, particularly music. It explores familial bonds, female friendships, and in a lot of ways, it is kind of a feminist telling and perspective of a lot of classic rock history, as you'll see. So, for the reading and the craft portion tonight, I'm going to connect those a little bit together. I'm definitely going to read three poems and discuss kind of the feminist bent of those poems, how I tackle them in different ways for each one. And, time allowing, um, we'll do a Q&A afterwards. So it's not just going to be me chatting at you. I think one of the benefits of coming to a reading is that all poetry should work well on the page. If you hear it then read out loud, hopefully that adds another level of the experience and understanding, especially getting the tone of the author themselves. And then you get an even deeper benefit, but deeper understanding if there is a discussion afterwards. And so while I believe all of these poems work on the page, I hope you get to experience them that way as well. Let's just capitalize on that benefit. And I'm going to read them, and then we'll have like some of that discussion. I will say this book is highly referential. It's a lot of intertextuality. And for those of you who are perhaps unfamiliar with that word, that really has to do with references or ekphrasic writing poetry or, doing any kind of art about another piece. So you don't need to get the references. Again, they should operate and be successful on the page or out loud without knowing the references. But there's a little bit of a benefit if you happen to know some of the references. So the title itself is Astral Weeks, etc. So the album by Van Morrison, Astral Weeks, and the rest. So it's not all Van Morrison. You don't need to be a Van Morrison fan. If you are, you know, that's a huge bonus. And um, I am actually the first one I'm going to read is called The First Draft of Astral Weeks, or the emotional labor of Janet Planet Rigsby Morrison. So I'll read that for you now and talk a little bit about my process. The first draft of Astral Weeks, or the emotional labor of Janet Planet Rigsby Morrison. Janet's at the kitchen table, transcribing raw buds of someone else's childhood, bending ghosts into memories, canopies casting shadows from Orangefield to Bay Street, arguments with her husband's heroes and home decor. Janet's at the kitchen table while little Peter naps, plays, ignores the harsh silence when the improvisation stops and his mother pauses, catches up, rewinds, plays back, and checks her work. Janet's at the kitchen table, making her own percussion, pressing buttons on the tape recorder, her pen like a pua, scraping a wiro as she scribbles over paper, over the linoleum surface in the cramped upstairs subdivided apartment, along the streets of trees and haphazard parking, windows open to a Cambridge spring. She's reading it back. She's dreaming down these avenues, back along the lane, saying what doesn't work. She's not just a ballerina, a little angel child. Janet's at her kitchen table, editing her own love song. So this poem to be, oh, thank you for the snap, Shauna. I've seen that. This poem operates kind of like a portrait, a slice in time where Van Morrison was writing Astral Weeks. And if there's one theme that, and one advice from a craft level that I would give you all is to do a lot of research about what you're writing, because you never know when you're going to find inspiration. And having that research also um, allows you to really put yourself in someone else's shoes and to portray them. So this is a portrait. I'm going to follow up by a persona poem to kind of discuss the difference. But along those research lines is I just want to give a plug for this book. It's Astral Weeks, A Secret History of 1968. And in it, musician and journalist Ryan H. Walsh discusses uh, Janet Morrison's first wife helping Van get the lyrics and everything right to the album that became, so seminal to his career. So he would just play, just jam. She would record it on a tape recorder and she helped him edit. It's not like she ever got songwriting credits. She doesn't get royalties for any of this. She was just a wife performing this labor and she was a mother there. Her son was around. She was multitasking. She was part of that work. And so it was important to me to shed a little light on that and imagine what that would have been like. In most, obviously, Ryan Walsh also was able to point that out. But typically, when you hear stories of Astral Weeks, it seems like this mad genius putting together this album that it didn't come fully formed. There was a lot of work and craft that went into it. Another thing that was really important to me was Janet's identity. Um, Her last name is now Minto, but Janet Planet was his nickname for her and how she was kind of known. So I thought that was important to include. But Rigsby was her maiden name. Morrison was her married name. And I had to make that case with first different workshop instructors and now with editors that the whole title should be as long as it is, to have all those aspects of her identity live within that poem, just in that title, to be introduced, not as Van Morrison's wife, but as by Janet, like her own person, to keep her nickname, keep her maiden name, keep her married name, for me now to say what's changed again, and allow her to be a fully formed person who is not just an accessory and a helper, but somebody who is actually doing a lot of not only emotional labor, but labor in saying what works, what is creative and successful, and being an impact into something so important. So, this kind of portrait of Janet at this time differs from the next poem I'm going to read, which again is about another wife of a musician. But a different tactic I used in this one was a persona poem. So that is really speaking from a character's point of view. And I do want you to read it without coloring your thoughts, and I'll discuss it afterwards. I will add one caveat, and we'll discuss why. There are lines in French in this poem. I'm not a French speaker, so bear with me if I butcher this and it makes no sense to you. I will translate it afterwards as well. This is Dominique in Woodstock, New York, 1967. I want to shout, Je m'ennuie, but my lashes are long enough that I never make eye contact. And the trees are tall enough, there's no horizon. Sometimes I still wear ribbons in my hair or the white T-strap Mary Janes I was married in. I don't say, Je suis agitée, je m'en prie à piège. The birches branching like picket fences that overlooking the Ashcotan Reservoir, I just see more trees. Janet sits on the floor's floor, reading palms, but my company are cats, cocktails, sometimes Sarah. The days are mostly nights, which are mostly noise. The sunlight has so far to go to come down through the leaves. But to Rolling Stone, here to talk to the boys, I say, there's nothing here but dope, music, and beauty. And if you're a woman and you don't make music and you don't use dope, there's nothing here at all. So that ending comes is actually a direct quote um, from Grail Marcus, who is a legendary rock critic for Rolling Stones, and he was there to talk with members of the band. Dominique Robinson was Robbie Robertson's wife, but she is a French-Canadian journalist who is now a therapist. So she's a very accomplished woman. I have not been able to read any of the archived articles she wrote before marrying Robbie Robertson because they were in French. And the French language was very important to her. She insisted that her children be born in Montreal so she could have French-speaking doctors. It was her first language. And reading that quote from her that appears in Grail Marcus's book really says a lot of her mindset during this time where she was a very accomplished woman being a supporting player to these musicians around her. So, I want to shout, Je m'ennuie or whatever. I am bored. The other French that I said later, um, I'm annoyed. I feel trapped. A lot of the things that she discussed was this feeling of not being able to express herself and having to be in this position where maybe she wasn't living to her full potential and there wasn't stuff in her life that were filling her soul in service to kind of filling everyone else's soul because I love the band. I listened to those albums and I'm so happy that Art is here on the planet, but maybe being alongside that journey was not as fulfilling for her. And I wanted her to have an inner monologue um, that was in her own language. I wanted her to have the last word in my poem where I was kind of having the audacity to speak on her behalf and let her speak in a direct quote. If you want to see her speak for herself, she is interviewed extensively in the 2019 documentary Once We're Brothers about the band. She speaks very eloquently within that about, again, issues of drug use and other things. And I recommend seeing that a little bit further. Again, on a craft level, where a persona poem is different than just the portrait of someone else, like my previous poem I read from Janet's perspective, the Dominique perspective, is that close first person monologue, allowing her to uh, really shout from the page rather than me just describing what that's like, looking in. And again, I'm looking forward to the Q&A and others take on how that works, and what is appropriate in what situation. One is peeking in and observing someone, one is allowing them to speak, literally in their own words, and some imagined words there. So if you were to write a persona poem, my advice to budding writers out there is, again, do your research, try your hardest to understand who this person is that you are trying to speak for, and see if there's a way that you can very ethically embody them without making big assumptions on their character. So those are just two different tactics that I used there. I'm going to read another one and just discuss that a little bit, and then I'll just finish with a few others. On being Pharrell, but probably not being Pharrell, for Sue and for Carissa. At the end of the year, there'll be a quiz on all the members of the band, we joke. Those late night texts saying, not asking, am I a good poet? Am I good? At dinner, I explain who George Martin was. I have another doors and talk about close miking drums on Sergeant Pepper's, which is not a new observation. It's not my observation. You ask about Ringo, and instead of answering, I talk about Pete Best. Am I good? I sound obnoxious. Those late night texts, here. Look what Levon's old girlfriend said. Look what Libby said. They were all busy living up to the story of the band and the whole Dylan myth. I don't want to be Bob Dylan. I want to be someone just a little more happy. So here we have mostly left the realm of other figures. There is a little bit of a quote, and again, it's a direct quote from Levon Helm's girlfriend Libby. He was the drummer in the band. So you can find her quote in here. This Wheel's on Fire, which is Levon Helm's autobiography. And you you can see, I was very happy to see, yeah, that color that it gives from an ex-girlfriend in someone else's autobiography. It's very interesting. But so I couldn't help but keep that in. But this poem is largely, about my own self, the relationship I have with art, with one another through art. It's dedicated to two friends. I think there is a tension in this poem that is a very, at least to me, female experience, where there is expertise coupled with self-doubt and self-criticism within it. And um, um, this poem, this collection of poetry isn't just looking at other figures in a biographical way. It's also about, mine my relationship with art, my relationships with other people through art. And I think that there's something kind of universal about that. It's how a lot of friends relate to one another. Um, and there's, because of that, there are a lot of dedications to other friends within this collection. And I would like to look at just a few more here, because this is a kind of a more uh, feminist take on here we go. I got all my like tabs here. Um, music, in this day and age, we can't talk about music without some major figures like Beyonce and Taylor Swift. So I'm going to read a Taylor Swift poem. I will recommend a wonderful essay that actually talks about the band and Beyonce's Lemonade album. It's by Daphne A. Brooks. She's a professor at Yale. It's from Liner Notes for the Revolution, and that's a Black feminist book of music criticism. So that's I'll let I'll just recommend that. Let you all read that for yourself. But in the meantime, here's a bit of Taylor Swift. It's called Folklore. I say there would be no folklore without Astral Weeks. And Louisa says dads everywhere would click on that still unwritten article and send it to their daughters as proof from another daughter that Taylor Swift is a saltwater taffy that strains the jaw as you eat, as you decide if you even like waxy sugar. But mostly, exile conjures Door County in September, when one sweater isn't comfort enough after dark, and you'll need a little Mount Gay in your cider to observe the blueness of Vega shining at the top of Lyra in the astral field. And who doesn't need to scream into waves at Cave Point as lake water touches bottom crests and crashes loudly against the cliffs? The music plays, and even the branches come alive in their seasonal decay, anthocyanid edging tree leaves as you sip craft cocktails at Wickman House. Floral notes of Death Door's gin, like John Payne on flute, writing on the top of the tune, smooth as goat milk soap. Wasn't the whole city of Milwaukee disappointed when Bon Iver didn't address the crowd 10 years after for Emma, like Van at the Hollywood Bowl, seeking protectionist from the loneliness of the crowd, walking on as the band's already playing, not speaking, but strumming? Wasn't Orpheus himself pulled apart? So, as you will note from so many other of these poems, this is highly referential to, Greek myths of Orpheus. It references other contemporary albums like Taylor Swift's Folklore that Bon Iver's playing it, just making a lot of connections. And I have a great comment here, Taylor Swift wishes. They, but also I want to make sure that those voices are also, they're placed within context of this, but they're also able to um, be loud on their own, exist on their own. Um, and so even if you didn't maybe get those references, hopefully you can appreciate me at a reading, not getting feedback from the crowd and still attempting some French and the words anthocyanid, because um, I, yeah, those aren't necessarily easy. Those work really well on the page, I will say. So at least I have some smiles there. Uh, we'll do, I think, I'm looking at the time, and we can just do just a few more. Again, this is one, well, you'll see. I promised myself I was going to talk about them at the end. Um, from Forest Hills Stadium, September 12th, 2018. Jessica Hopper suggests we put on Sweet Thing on repeat and see who cries first. This and other Astral Weeks alchemy screams from the screaming cover, the first collection of criticism by a living female rock critic. But if I was playing Sweet Thing Chicken, I'd be bowled over from the first stretched out eye, a vowel that lengthens the listener's shadow, pulls and releases with the grace of an unsnapped elastic, accommodating for our cosmic duality. So again, this is just another shout out to all of these other artists and critics living around me. I think this very powerful title of this book speaks for itself. The first collection of criticism by a living female rock critic. And um, she has an essay in here called Between the Viaducts of Your Dreams on Van Morrison. Between the Viaducts of Your Dreams is how the song Astral Weeks on the album Astral Weeks begins. And while it's criticism, there is a deep tenderness in how she experiences some of those songs on those albums um, and conveying that it was something that you can feel and hear without the album being present. And I think that's one of the things that very successful writing does. And I think I'm attempting to do that in this poem as well by, the grace of an unsnapped elastic and feeling that like tension and how that hits me. And, of course, the first time I saw Van Morrison was in 2018 at Forest Hill Stadium in Queens. And it was, I was wet with rain, it was pouring rain, but it was really, the powerful moment that I believe she captures there, what I'm attempting to capture here in that experience. Again, I'm looking at the time and I just have just a few more here. If these are good to me. My post-its. Once I get the book in hand, it'll be a lot less squeaky going through this, but we'll all have to wait until um, uh, March 14th. This is called The Sweet Inspirations, or In Defense of Brown-Eyed Girl. How many listening know that it's Cissy Houston singing sha la 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 la, just like that? Or that Russ Savkist used a pick to pluck his bass for added punctuation during the bridge, like the pointed discs of river rock on the footbridge over the beachy that runs the whole length of the hollow behind the row houses of a Beta parade. How many know that there are holes where the stones have been kicked loose from the mortar? How like childhood, something is gone, but a depression remains. So the title is the kind of the backing group, the Sweet Inspirations. That's Cissy Houston, who was Whitney Houston's mother, was a musician. She was in a girl group called the Sweet Inspirations, and they did a lot of work for Bang Records. So when Van Morrison recorded his, best known Brown Eyed Girl, that is the backing vocals singing the sha la la. And again, it's, I was trying to illuminate some of the contributions that different women had in the productions of this music. And again, the key here is research, having something feel authentic, even though you're creating original work, you can be alluding to either specific aspects to the music itself, quoting, even if it's shalalas, and really kind of highlighting some of these works here. I saw it in the chat. Someone says I got an A on my homework. Thank you. Uh, but it's also if there's something that you love and you're passionate about, whether it's Flemish paintings. I know we have you know what it is you're talking about before you try to create artwork from that, and uh, you'll avoid a lot of writer's block, a lot of there'll be a lot more moments where you're able to fill in the things that really feel true within the work. I was lucky enough to go to Belfast, and in Brown Eyed Girl, I was like down in the hollow. Uh, the hollow is I can't sing. Those who can't do, write poems about music rather than playing music or trying to attempt to sing. But the hollow is a park that was behind Van Morrison's home when he was a child. So he walked through the hollow to the school orange field, which also um, made a cameo in my Janet Planet poem. So his experience of being a boy in this setting along the beachy river, where there are a lot of myths about different fairies and Irish folklore in that space. Um, he's adding he added himself something that we might hum along to and not know that the hollow is a real place, and he's talking about a specific area when he's talking singing about this kind of like early love song. So being there and experiencing that also helps. That was a very privileged thing I was able to do. Not everyone can go and track down, walk in the park behind their subject's home. But if you can, you'll never notice what, you might not notice, like the river rocks and the little stone bridge being kicked away. So once you have that research, once you have that background, you're able to build off of that on a craft level, seeing those um, details that you wouldn't get to experience otherwise. And if you can't do that in person, doing that uh, through, other people's research, other people's narratives, other people's interviews, you'll still be able to, craft, hopefully some stronger pieces. So I think we probably have time for two more. If I can get to them, this little spiral bound books aren't the easiest. One second. Okay. This one's called Looking for the Veden Fleece. From Limerick, I went on to Spanish Point. The dunes roll down between the headlands into surf breaks and curved pockets of coast where stones bit through the sand like dorsal fins, the parallel lines of incoming waves forming their own geometry against ancient sediment. At cocktail hour, there were hardly colors. The lingering sunlight put a veil over the banks. Maybe it was the sea spray or the wind kicking up silt in the links, the air full of particle reflections, turning everything aglow, without definition, casting Counting Clare into gold and gray. By the time I got to Balai, I was confronted with postscript. Along the flaggy shore, when the wind and sunlight are working off each other so that the ocean on one side is wild with foam and glitter, I wanted to sink into the Atlantic. You don't push the river. William Blake and the Eternals, Seamus Heaney. You don't push the river, but you don't pull no punches. I was there. The air smelled of sheep and alfalfa instead of kelp. It was alive with apparitions of wrecked Armada sailors. I was watching surfers at sunset, feeding myself on soup and brown bread. And when I turned the corner and saw 11 swans improbably flying like a broken Christmas song in the lee of the Mourne Mountains, wings as white as canvas sails, necks like reaching struts, I ran flat-footed, heels slamming the whole width of Torella Beach, packed hard as cement, pitted from razor clams, until I was deep enough in the Irish Sea to sting my skin purple. I'm gonna do just two more to end on. Ways of looking at foreign window. The spines of my books look like crow's feet, lines of crushed wisdom into paper housing my collected consciousness. Across continental divides, I carry these books stuffed into suitcases, slouched, water damaged. We all have reasons for moving. Now I'm free to roam everywhere I go. I feel like I'm home. I no longer know how to pray, but I was reading on the sofa. I was singing every prayer. I was singing, choking, face turning hot, wet cheeks, talking back in margins, yawning muscles in blue ink. I spied her from the foreign window, walking her dog, such a pedestrian act for the herbalist next door who dances naked at the Ballyno stone circle on the solstice. Running down the autumn road, the black-faced sheep skitter like a murmuration of blackbirds. I slept through the dawn chorus. I made friends with the Kerry cattle. I could not see out of my window, but drank from the stream that ran through the garden, where, if I couldn't write, I could read. I had gone down to Lake Geneva, cradling ideas of this side of paradise, which only made me feel pride in the cliff walk. Maybe I miss the salt water and sailboats. Oh, says Rimbaud, let me go into the sea. Oh man, says Byron, thou feeble tenant of an hour. If you get it right this time, there's no need to revise. Driving all night, chasing some mirage, tell the folks back home, this is the promised land calling, and I'm not looking for Tir Nanog. The hills aren't green, but a patchwork of purple and yellow heather past its bloom, where the wind comes up and scatters powdery white buds like moths over the roadways, where the doors to the monastic city are 12 feet up, but we are all forgiven because we ask to be. Homesick means the opposite of what it should. This window is a mirror. Make me down a pallet on the floor where my thoughts escaping, where my music's playing, where I can bed down on my own, vertiginous and hypertensive. Make me a horizon so I never need another. So in a book that's highly referential, this is the most collaged work that I probably have. So maybe there were just little moments of lyrics people here are able to pull out, or snippets of poetry. Of course, there's never more than, two lines in a row. After three lines, it's really hard to get royalties from Sony, I've discovered in publishing. So um, both artistically and legally, there's nothing more than that in a row. And a lot of times they are corrupted a little bit in a way that I am able then to serve my own purposes while also benefiting the poem while making that reference. And again, hopefully, whether or not anyone recognized any of those lyrics, they're able to um, take something from the poem without it. And so um, last one, um, there's a big note I'm going to read in the beginning about the Allahorman. It comes from Bob Curran's A Field Guide to Irish Fairies. The most notable are the Lochherman, fairies found only in South Armagh and Northern Ireland, who are surly and have an unsociable disposition. The Lochherman guard hoards of hidden gold, and their sole purpose is to drive away inquisitive strangers. So here's the Lochherman. I've been living with a Lochherman, and the nasty things spat from his lips in fits of contempt, swallowing shards of broken daydreams splintering inside me as I digest doubt for days. I can feel his cheeks burning red with each inquiry. Why must I always explain? I have been living with this fairy engulfed under his king tides, breathing through my gulls, leeching off his magic, drinking the iron in his blood, bitter as cruciferous vegetables, sharp and bright as tinsel. I've been living with this fairy. I've been dancing in his shadow. When you write a book that has a lot of Van Morrison within it, who is not necessarily he's not a nice guy. There's a lot of bitterness, and it felt like I was living with this very magical being while writing this book because there was so much inspiration, there was so much excitement, fulfillment that I got through his art, and then I was frequently confronted with some of the not so pleasant things about him, especially during the pandemic, kind of anti-science movements, anti-Semitic lyrics that were coming out, things I do not endorse. And I did want to end on that all these characters are, the not characters, they're real people in a lot of these senses. It's I am engaging with their artwork and how it fulfills, but it's not necessarily, I'm not you know, um, advocating for their beliefs outside of their artwork. Um, but again, thank you everyone for being here. I know this is going to be the fun portion as I'm seeing like the chat start to come alive with a couple questions. So Sean, do you want to take it away for the
Yeah,
A?
absolutely, Brooks. Thank you so much. That reading was delightful. I think my favorite of those poems was the folklore poem, and I'm not a Swiftie. In fact, I'm like very much not in pop culture, but all the references somehow like work. I mean, that's her like
Milwaukee.
only
Yeah.
that's like yeah,
Okay.
Milwaukee. That's also my like the album of hers that I actually kind of like. Bonnie Vare. You meant Door County. Shout out to Door County.
Yeah.
Beautiful. We love upstate Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Also Orifice and Eurydice. So anyway, loved that poem. Um, we will, yeah, for the rest of this call, be doing a Q&A. So we've already got one hand up. If you want to ask your question and you're not worried about being recorded, feel free to use the raise your hand function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you don't want to be recorded, you can message your question in the chat and I will read it for you. And I'll just start off the Q&A. I'm curious, Brooks, how did Morrison's, like the writing of Morrison's songs itself, right? How did that inspire your writing and your approach to writing the collection? Like how does Morrison's approach to songwriting affect your approach to poetry writing?
Oh, that I love that question. I've always really loved illusions. It's like building a brand new house on an already built foundation. You're still doing the work of building, but because somebody has built the foundation, if you allude to something else, it's efficient in terms of just being an artist. That's a way to communicate the whole um, kind of breadth of that work and add that to your own. And I've always just found that really inspiring. Um, not just the borrowing, but the building. on that. And Van Morrison, in his own lyrics, he is referencing, you know, so many other writers. So William Blake and the Eternals, that's in uh, his Veed Fleece album, from the Veed Fleece album, uh, You Don't Pull No Punches, but You Don't Push the River, which I was alluding to in my Looking for the Veed Fleece. Uh, he's singing about Lord Byron and in T.S. Eliot. There's so many things in his own work that are referential that I wanted to build off of that. So that's, why it's um there's a lot of Van Morrison in the book. There's a lot of Counting Crows in there too, and Adam Duritz, a songwriter for Counting Crows, he alludes to Saul Bellows and the Rain King, and it can be missed frequently in lyrics as you're going along with the tune, but that artistry is there. I'm not saying that they're the most artistic as that. Whenever I say like I did this work on Van Morrison, some Bob Dylan fan comes at me and are like, "What about this?" And I'm like, "Well, what about Robbie Robertson as a songwriter, his use of character, or Paul Simon?" I can reference a lot of those contemporaries in a similar way, but it's his particular use of allusions that I was inspired by and built off of.
Thank you. Jay,
I think there may have been a couple of people in the chat who are ahead of me. I don't know.
go ahead and
What?
ask, and then I'll.
Okay, all right. uh, Thanks for the shout out for Door County, but also Milwaukee and Lake Geneva. Go
Yeah.
Badgers. And I want to ask you about persona poems, but first, I'm also curious. Did you contact or send the poems to your first two subjects, the spouses?
Thank you actually for that. My the Dominique's daughter, I was at a poetry conference and somebody knew her and I showed him that poem and he said, "I'm texting it to her." And that was actually really, I feel like it was such a validating moment because she wrote back to be like, "Oh, so she knew my parents back in the 60s. I was not born until the 80s. I did see that question come up in the chat to be like, "Oh, so you really love these um, individuals, but you seem young." I am drawn to some contemporary musicians. That's why there's a Taylor Swift or like, Counting Crows poems in there. But hearing Dominique's and Robbie's daughter, her response thinking, "Oh, she must have known my parents when I do not," that felt really good. That felt like I had captured what she was trying to say. I will have an event coming up in the spring with Ryan Walsh, the journalist who wrote this book, which is 10 out of 10 recommends this book. And he did interview Janet extensively, and I'm hoping he'll pass that on and kind of not have to um, I can do a little bit of journalism, track her down, but I also respect people's privacy. I've worked for musicians before and I know the spam that they can get. So I want to make sure that I'm respecting those boundaries. But thank you for
Yeah,
asking.
yeah, sure. But also seems to me that the common theme there is sort of not being seen, and your poem, sees them. And so I think that that's particularly special about that. In terms of persona, and by the way, I love your stress on research. It's one of the real most fun things about writing is doing the research, even when it's not persona poems. But in terms of persona poems, now you mostly talked about a specific kind where the persona is a living person. So then there's like a special responsibility, and then when you in fact make things up, so to speak, there's got to be a particular reason, and the consequences are way different. But even in terms of persona poems generally, I mean, I've written persona poems from the point of view of a dog, a typewriter, a lot of biblical characters, and also a female public health worker who's fired. And so that raises a other question, which often we encounter, which is the whole issue of appropriation. Like, what can you write about and what can't you write about and when? I mean, to me, it's painful almost because to me, being a poet is all about using your imagination and building empathy through those ways. So I'm just wondering if you have a point of view on that.
Yeah, and uh, the poet Patricia Smith, she's a really firm believer that there's nothing you can't write about, and I would like to say that that's true as well. As you said, that's an imaginative process, but then it comes with this huge asterisk of do the research. So I'm, again, I'm not French Canadian, I'm American. I'm of a different generation. How am I going to ethically handle that? So if you're writing about maybe a typewriter, it is an inanimate object, that responsibility isn't there as much. But if you're taking on someone who has a different job than you, different race, different identity, there is a lot more, kind of background work, I think that can go into that. But I would say, that doesn't mean that it's off limits. It means there might be a lot more drafts. There might be a little bit more legwork going into that. So I wouldn't dissuade anyone from taking them on. I would just add, you know, um, to be careful how you do it. One book that does this particularly well is Tyembe Jess's Lead Belly. There's a lot of persona poems in that. So if anyone's looking to figure out how to do it well, um, I only have one persona poem in this collection. There's a lot in here, and so I would recommend that book. Yeah. And
Thank you.
along those lines, I see Eva asked, do you prefer writing persona poems or writing poems about another person instead? And I would definitely say another person or my own experience. So some of those that were capturing my own experience were the On Being Fragile poems about my own kind of self-doubt, even the one I ended on about the lawman, having that experience that I was having, looking for the Vedan fleece. Those were very personal narratives. So that tends to be the bulk of my other work. Um, and I see another,
Melissa, yeah,
yeah.
Melissa asks, I often take a line from a song and build a poem from it. Did you start with the lyrics or write a piece where a line or lyric falls into place?
Because there's a kind of around 80 poems in this collection, there were times that I started with a lyric that certainly were experiences that I was happening, but more often than not, it was other things I was describing, interactions between friends, my own journeys, my own whatnot, and then it would remind me of a particular lyric, and that would then get incorporated, and that was again the efficiency of allusions, because you're able to not explain necessarily all the context by using um, a reference there. So that process, I wouldn't say, it wouldn't be prescriptive about it to say start with a lyric and go for it, or if that's what you're doing, keep at it. Or you might find that you're writing something and God, that really reminds you of this great song, and that comes in there. And so I would, again, on a craft level, I would recommend both ways.
Cynthia asks, and a couple of other people have the same question. Given all of the poetic lyrics and music by Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, etc., how did you arrive at Van Morrison
I don't know if I just
as the
froze.
artist? Nope, you're here.
Okay, good. Uh, first off, I do, as much as I try not to be, I am a huge fan. That is, not that I'm not of, Joni and Paul Simon and Bob Dylan, but again, I'd have to go back to his use of references. He also has such an enormous catalog from so many years. So this, of course, their references back to the 60s, till, you know, uh, um, he put out something in 2018, Three Chords and the Truth, his song Dark Night of the Soul. Like it holds up. Like he's in his 70s and maybe he's lost a step, but that one was really good. Check it out. So that the breadth of all that work really gave me a lot of material to engage with. And but yeah, it was some of his own literary techniques that he uses in his lyrics that made it particularly appealing to engage with in that way. And of course, Paul Simon, Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, they use wonderful literary techniques in that their work. I will say that lyrics are literature. Lyrics don't need to be poetry to be, I think they're two different, similar, overlapping genres. They are literature on their own. So, of course, great songwriters are using wonderful literary devices within their work. And there was just that particular literary device of the intertextuality that gave me a lot of material to jump off as a jumping off point. Yeah.
Linda, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. This time has been very stimulating, in my head and in my heart. So could you put the reference, that persona book reference in the text? I didn't actually get that whole title. And then I had a question just about persona, but I'm wondering if it's a different term that I'm looking for, that I'm thinking about. Just the whole question is about, as a creative person, how much do we need to really check in with others when we're writing? If it's a poem we just create about something, or if it's about people. I mean, just like a mother. It is my story, my poem, but it may involve my children who are amateur adults now. So what do I need to preserve? And if that's a reference you could put in the text where I could really learn more about that term, that personification, and just what other term, I can't think what it is, but I need something.
Yeah, intertextuality, was that the term you were thinking of? But
Intertextuality, possibility.
yeah. I did want to just answer the question. The Grail Marcus book that has the quote from the Dominique Robertson poem. It's actually a book not on the band. It's called Listening, when that rough god goes riding, listening to Van Morrison. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, in terms of writing about your family, I have, luckily with their blessing and their support, and with the understanding that I'm a writer, and if they want to, they can write their own poems that refute or the narrative that I'm experiencing, because I think everyone has their own truths. I think in terms of your question, one of the things that was really kind of jumping out to me is it depends what you want to do with it. If it's a poem for your own self, that can be really powerful, and you can say your deepest, darkest secrets there. You don't need to share it with anybody. I will say this is a great plug for writers.com, because they are, have writing workshops. You're going to build a community. And if there's something you think, have I been insensitive here in any way? You will have other peers as your kind of first drafts in an unjudgmental way, being able to help you. I love my workshops I've been in. They've been my first readers. They've been some of my biggest support. Hello to those of you in my former workshops who are actually on this call. That helps. That always helped me become a better writer. As a person, I'm pretty social. I loved being coached in sports. I loved being able to improve in those ways. And so if I was maybe making a misstep and I wasn't considering other perspectives, bringing that to my attention in a constructive, gentle way, it has been a huge benefit. So I can't say enough about that. And then that helps prepare it for the broader audience of like the wide world. And so, and sometimes it also takes a little bit of creativity. If there's something that you want to say, like, my boss is so annoying, and you're like, oh no, my boss is going to read this, there might be a creative way to have that still in the world that's going to protect your relationships. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
And someone put in the chat the title of the book, so thank you, Kelsey, for the Grail Marcus one. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Brooks. We're at time, but this has been wonderful. Brooks, so nice to see you again, and thank you for sharing your poems. I will put in the chat once more Brooks's forthcoming poetry collection, Astral Weeks, etc., by Finishing Line Press. It is out on March 14th, but if you pre-order it by, is it January 17th?
Yes, January
Pre-order it,
17th.
yes, by
Thank you.
then, yes, pre-order it by
You
then,
get
you'll
to
get a discount.
save a few dollars. You get to save a few dollars, and
We love saving others.
yeah, if you're interested. So, yes,
That's
thank you
thank
again,
you for the
writers.com.
writers.com shout outs.
Yes, of course. Yeah, send them for their newsletter. All right.
Sign up for the newsletter. Buy her
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
Thank you
All
so
right.
much for
Thank you
spending the
all.
evening in poetry with us.
Yes,
Thank you
thanks.
so much. Thank you.
Yeah, good night.